I guess we should get going. How we listen live, the knowledge to move your music forward. So the agenda, just so everybody knows, for you all who've never been before, I talk a bit about what beta is and what How We Listen is, so everybody gets an idea of why we do these events. Then I do a couple announcements just of upcoming stuff we have, stuff that you all might find interesting. And then in part two, I'm going to be talking with Andee from Pandora. So first timers, my name is Mark Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of Beta. This is a Canadian accent. All you Americans should be able to tell the difference. I lived in the UK for years, but now I live in sunny Stockholm, Sweden. And I always make sure to talk about my background because I think it's good for everybody to get an idea of my perspective and where I come from when I talk about things. So I started in the late 90s at an independent record label, pre-internet. Then I moved to the UK. I worked in the A&R department at Creation Records, which is one of, if not, one of the most important indie labels in UK history. Then I worked at another small indie label where I started doing radio promotion. And then I left there and ran my own radio and TV promotion company for about 14 or 15 years. And then all my time in the UK was in London. And then around the time that I moved to Sweden, I started Beta. And so what is Beta? Beta is the platform that enables sending and receiving of digital audio in a clean, simple, and secure way, built for everyone working with music today. What does that mean in short? Fast and secure audio sharing. And how are we different than other platforms you use to share your audio? We take advantage of of AudioFile's unique properties, of which there are 3, and all of you know these. Metadata, that's the information embedded in the files. We read and write that information. So when you upload a file to Beta, we pull all the metadata out, we let you edit it, and we update the files before they go up to the cloud. And so we read and write all types of metadata, including WAV metadata. Then file formats and audio security. Unlike if you're using, say, Dropbox to share your audio, with Beta, you upload in one file format, and then you can share in different file formats. So upload in a lossless format, then you can share in another lossy format. And then third, but one of the most important, is we offer fast yet secure streaming. So you can't rip our links, which is one of the reasons people love us. And our mission statement is to provide artists and their teams with the tools and the knowledge to move their careers forward. So how do we do that? Well, simple. Beta is the tool. That's easy to understand. But then we also realized that we needed a way to deliver knowledge, and that's where How We Listen comes from. And How We Listen started out as a web interview series that we're still doing today. Jamie will throw a link in the chat. And it's where we interview people about how they find, listen, and experience music. And the reason we started it was because this was about 3 or 4 years ago, was because we got really sort of pissed off when you go and hear people talk and to artists and people who want to work in and around music, and people would say, oh, you know, just upload your music to streaming platforms and the algorithm will pick it up and everything will go great. Just upload it to SoundCloud and you'll blow up overnight. Or that, oh, you want to get on a playlist, and if you're at the top of a playlist, oh, it's great. Again, that's not a solution, and we wanted to show people that there are different nuanced ways to find and listen and experience new music. So what I like to do is go through just a couple interviews and give people some examples of insights that people talk about. And so this person, Audrey, says, my biggest annoyance with digital listening is getting stuck in an echo chamber of the same music and artists. While I love listening to songs I know and love, I appreciate a bit more variety and exploration in the algorithms to introduce a little new artists and songs more frequently. And I think as much as people love sort of, you know, data-driven playlists and stuff, I think everybody would agree that you sort of, when you go down a rabbit hole, a lot of the music ends up sounding the same. So I totally agree with Ashley. So the pros and cons to AI, definitely. And then we have another series called Method to My Music, which is a little more artist focused, where they talk about the music creation process. And this one from Dakota Jones, who's an artist, says, I always want to be that person that just sits and writes for hours every single day. But when I try to do that, nothing comes out. I'm stuck with inspiration at the most random times, and I just have to chase it down as it's happening. And I think this quote's quite interesting because, you know, as we'll be talking about later, I think everybody looks for, you know, a direct line, step by step, this is how it's going to go. And I think, you know, building your career, developing as an artist is just as difficult as creating music. It just doesn't happen. You can't order it up in any short fashion. So that's something good to think about. I definitely agree with Dakota. Then the third series we have, I believe we run it every month, where we get someone who we know to talk, do a little more of a deep dive around something related to digital that they're interested in. And so this time it's Virginie. She's talking about ChatGPT, which I've used a bit, but I thought her quotes, Jamie's going to throw a link in the chat so you all can read it. But I thought this was interesting, you know, because I've heard about this generating, you know, lyrics using ChatGPT and stuff. So I'll read this quote. As of now, ChatGPT primarily operates with text. While it can help generate lyrics or describe musical concepts, it doesn't create music or melodies. For instance, you could use it to respond to fans' comments or inquiries on social media, ensuring each response feels personal and engaging. I thought this was pretty good because if you're replying to emails all the time, it's hard sometimes to start the flow. And I thought this was a really good suggestion because, you know, ChatGPT just spills something out for you and you can edit. So I thought that was good. And then this I thought was interesting. I don't know, this might be a tad controversial, but I'm going to read it again anyway. ChatGPT can provide preliminary advice on copyright and intellectual property rights. While it can't replace professional legal advice, it can provide starting point for understanding these complex topics. And I think she's right, but then I also think that getting stuff filtered into text that you can understand, I think is also quite positive, because a lot of legalese around things that you don't understand can be quite difficult. So that's another reason I've used ChatGPT for the same thing. So let me go here. So how we listen. What is how we listen live and why are we doing it? Well, how we listen, I explained what it is. But how we listen live is more about talking to people where you can't really capture everything in text, and where we want to take a deep dive on a subject, where we want to exchange ideas back and forth. And it's exciting to get together every month and do these kind of events. And so that's the reason it's really fun to do it live. Just for the record, everybody does these events for free. And what we do in exchange is we give a little money to Maytree, which is a residence for people who are feeling suicidal in London. Super important to me, super important to us, Sabita. So take a screenshot, take a look for yourselves. I'm sure it'll be important to you. This is my own site where you can get all my contact details and stuff if you want to hit me up. I'm pretty good on LinkedIn if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn or Instagram. Facebook group, Jamie will throw the link in the chat if anybody's interested in getting information on these kind of events and they like using Facebook for that. That's the way to do it. YouTube channel, the key to remember is if you come to an event and you don't make it, you'll still get a link to listen back. Then we put it up on YouTube after it's been edited a couple weeks later. Then we also release it as a podcast on your favorite podcast provider. So any way you want to listen, all you do is sign up for the event and you'll get everything. So if you want to look at me sitting in front of my palm tree, YouTube's a place. Then another series we did in partnership with Music Brains is this partnership on talking about metadata. And part 2 was released a couple weeks ago. Part 3 is coming, when is it? Next week, I think. So it's a 3-part series. It's super interesting. Those people in Music Brains, they're super nerdy, but they know everything about metadata, and these articles are great. Jamie will throw them in the chat. Lastly, any questions? Here are all the links. You can contact me, mark@beta.com. Beta.com is where you can find all of us. How we listen, just not us. There you go. Andy, where are you? Are you there? Hello? Hello?
Hello. Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. So do you want to tell people where you are?
I am in the mountains of rural Oregon, where I moved here. I lived in San Francisco for 30 years, and I just recently moved to a house on the top of a mountain in the woods, which has sort of been a goal of mine for a long time.
So you didn't grow up in San Francisco then? Where did you grow up?
I was born in Illinois, and then I moved to Los Angeles, and then I sort of grew up mostly in San Diego. And
Okay.
then when I was older, I moved to San Francisco. Yeah.
And why'd you move to SF?
I moved to San Francisco because at the time, which was 1990, it was sort of the promised land for artists and bands. And I was 20, and I could live with like 5 people in a huge Victorian and have a cheap practice space. And I basically moved there to get away from San Diego where I grew up, but also just to sort of play music and do art. And, I feel like everybody has that sort of, this like dream place. And for me at that time, that was like, it was a place where tons of bands I loved were from, and it was really cheap to live there. And it was great for a long time. It was really great.
And so so you were there like, how long is that? 90s, 30 years?
33 years, I think, or 34
okay,
years.
How do you sum up what you've been doing for 30 years? Like, how did you start working around music?
Well, I started playing drums when I was 9, but not really seriously. I just sort of, I think drums are very appealing to kids because they're loud and they're irritating, and your parents hate them. And I don't know how I convinced my parents to let me have drums, but I took drum lessons briefly and then stopped, and then when I was in high school, I sort of got more serious about playing music. And then but my first real proper band, I think I was 18 or 19, and then from there until 40, I think I've spent most of my life touring and recording and making records and doing all that stuff, in addition to sort of the other stuff I had going on. But music, right when I was sort of exiting high school, entering college, that's when I got serious about playing drums and learning other instruments and playing music in general.
And then like working in music, did that happen because you needed something to pay the bills? Or or was it more of a DIY thing? You're like, oh, I got to do all this stuff because we can't get signed.
No, it was sort of I think when you're in a band, you have very limited, and you want to tour all the time, you have very limited options of what kind of job you can have. And so I worked at this bagel store in San Francisco that was across the street from Aquarius Records, which was this cool little record store. And every day after work at the bagel store, I would walk across the street and I would spend like hours, I'm sure, being super annoying to the people who worked at the record store. And then after a few years, the woman who ran the record store just was like, hey, you should just work here. You're here every day. And so she hired me. And it was great because I could still take 6 months off every year and go tour. And then I ended up being there for years and years and years. And eventually my partner, Alan, who I went on tour. I went on tour one time, and I came back, and she had hired someone new, my friend Alan, who was then my boss, which I found really annoying. And then maybe like maybe 10 years later, Alan and I were thinking about starting our own record store, but the owner of the Aquarius was kind of reaching the end of her tenure, so we ended up just buying the store. And then so that was a big shift for me when I sort of shifted from touring all the time and playing music to running my record store for 20 years. Yeah.
And so, like, if I remember correctly, back then, that was the classic way you'd get into working in music, right?
Well, yeah,
Like
I think
people would,
yeah, there was the path of, historically it was like you played in a band, then you worked in a record store, and then you would work at a record label, like be an A&R person or whatever. But you know, now that's sort of shifted. There's the same record label paradigm doesn't exist. So I think a lot of maybe the same path exists, but now that path culminates in places like Pandora or Amazon or Apple or Spotify,
yeah.
like
And
you have
so
a very comprehensive but potentially useless body of knowledge. Like you can ask me anything about any ridiculous record from the last 30 years. What can you do with that knowledge other than, continue on this path of working in a streaming service or working at a record store or working at a label? So,
and then on the side of running the record store, you ran a label as well.
Yeah, I ran a label from 2000 to for about 20 years, did about 60 releases. My label was a big part of, this might be super obscure, but there's sort of a very robust black metal movement on the West Coast, and that was a big part. My label played a big part in that. But initially I started my label because I was obsessed with this band from Chicago who were on Rough Trade in the 80s, and via all these like random machinations I ended up re-releasing their Rough Trade records, and that was the first record I put out. And we're in a weird sort of full circle. I'm now working on a documentary about that band because they've been working on their 7th record for 27 years. Which I think makes for an interesting story.
but the question is, like, how does someone who's into that kind of music end up, because you work at Pandora, and so it's like, and we could talk about exactly what Pandora is in a second, but how do you, Pandora doesn't sound very punk rock or whatever. Like, how did you end up working there?
Well, so we ran Aquarius. Alan and I ran Aquarius until 2016, and like the interesting thing I think about record stores, and probably a lot of other niche kind of businesses, is like we didn't start a record store because we wanted to run our own business. We started a record store because we loved music. And so I don't think anyone who ran the store at any point was particularly good at business, but we kind of got lucky. And when we bought the store, everything was going gangbusters. And then 2008 happened, and it was the crash. And then we sort of survived. And by the end, we were sort of, Alan and I were working for free and not paying ourselves. And we were living in San Francisco, which had just gotten more and more expensive. And to be totally honest, as much as I love the store and I'm proud of it and I miss it, part of me was also kind of hankering for something new, like a new adventure. And what happened was there's another record store in San Francisco called Amoeba, which is really huge and famous. And one of my friends who worked there got a job at Pandora. And I don't know how deep we want to get into this, but this random job opened up at Pandora that everyone thought sounded like the worst possible job. And my friend who worked at Pandora thought that I would love doing that job. And I did, and I got it. So, which was basically essentially listening to demos all day, every day. So,
but I do actually want to talk about this, because it's we're going to touch on it throughout our conversation, I think, but it's like, explain why you listen to demos, because I think this is very hard for artists or even managers to understand the view on the other side of the table, the experience of the incoming volume of releases. So like, what was the job exactly?
Well, so for people who don't know, Pandora is the largest streaming service in the US. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Spotify, whatever. So Pandora is sort of still the OG streaming service. At the time, we offered this, now it's all very streamlined and everything is metadata is very much regimented. But back then, we decided to make a way for artists who were not connected with a distributor, who didn't have an aggregator. We wanted them to still be able to get their music on Pandora. And so what they would do is they would send the CDs in, and actually back then we actually bought CDs too. So we would buy CD. We had a whole room with like all these machines and like.
And what year is this?
This would have been 2000. When did I start? 16, maybe 2000. This started in like 2010, I think, where we would buy
CDs to import to add to the.
Well, it gets a little complicated, but like there are two ways of listening. There's on-demand listening and there's radio listening.
Okay.
And Pandora had this unique, like there was often records that were not available digitally.
Yeah.
But legally, Pandora could go to like Amazon, buy it, import it, and then play it on radio, like not on demand, but like.
Oh, yep, got it.
So it was cool that there were a lot of things that were only on Pandora, but you could only listen as like a passive lean back listener. But anyway, this job, basically we made a way for artists, they could send in their music and we would vet it. Pandora was the only curated service. So like that was one of the that made Pandora special, is that like, there's 40 million songs on Spotify, but we were very curated on Pandora, where we like decided what should be on Pandora. And so at one point it was decided that we had a requirement that to be on Pandora, you had to have a physical release. Like you had to have something for sale on Amazon or in record stores or whatever. They changed that rule and then basically opened it up to anyone who had even a digital release. And so within like a month, the submissions went from 100 a week to like 1 to 2,000 a week. And there was no way to keep up with that. And so they decided to hire someone new. And they were like, who on earth would want to listen to demos all day, every day? And my friend Diego was like, I bet my friend Andy would love that job. And I did. And so for 3 or 4 years, that was the main part of my job. Is I was the sort of curator for independent music on Pandora, where I would I think I listened to 50 or 60,000 demos in 3 years.
Because somebody wrote in the chat that they sent in their first CD and it got added. So, So
I did that.
Yeah. It's all come first circle. Goodbye. Yeah. Because I think what's interesting about that is it shows like, so you're running a record store, everything's physical, people are buying oh, here we've got, they're all chiming in with how they send in CDs. So like, you're working in a record store, it's all physical, and then suddenly everything goes digital and it goes through the roof, the amount of submissions. And I think like the numbers today that they talk about, all the tracks that are added to streaming platforms every day or whatever, like I like, how do you think things have changed? Because you've got, in that say 20, 30-year period, you've got a pretty broad overview of how the digital world has affected, the creation of music and the sale or experience of music. Like, what are the things that you think about most in that change?
Well, no, that's really, that had a huge effect on why the store ended. Obviously, when we when we started the store, when Al and I took over the store, we were one of the few stores at the time, and this is very early internet days, you know, like we had a mailing list. We were like curators, and that was still something new and special, you know. And now I feel like that's changed as sort of everything becomes available everywhere all the time. Curation remains important, but everyone's a curator, you know. And at the time when we started, we were one of the few. And so like with the advent of Bandcamp and just individual, it really changed the dynamic of how you discover music and how you purchase music. And you know, we had the same problems as anyone. People would come to a small store and they would find something they liked, and then they would go home and buy it on Amazon. And you know, that kind of stuff really sort of changed the dynamic. And then I think I remember we had this like I've been playing music forever, and you know, going on tour was a big ordeal for you know, you'd have to buy a van and build a loft and blah blah blah. And I remember we had this employee who, and this was right at the beginning, I think, of MySpace, who had gotten signed. He had like 3 songs on MySpace, and he got signed to some big label, and we were like, oh my god, that's amazing. And then he came into the store the day he was leaving for tour, and all he had was a duffel bag and a laptop. And we were like, that's so incredible. Like the whole thing was so alien to someone who had been like, oh yeah, I have to load all my drums into the van and then drive for, and he's like, no, I'm just flying to Europe. And then it was just such a different, I think maybe I had like veered off topic a little, but I remember that was the first person I knew who I was like, oh, this is a whole different world, like how this is working.
But what you touch on there is interesting. It's like not only the way that person got signed, but also the way they create music.
Oh,
Because
for
the way
sure.
people create music has also changed radically.
I mean, even
That you don't need. Go on, sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say it's challenging too, because of course I come from this very punk rock world where like we, you know, like you have this network that supports what you do. So you have friends who are recording engineers, you have friends who are front of house engineers, and a lot of that stuff changed where suddenly you can make a world class sounding record without an engineer, without booking studio time. Like that was a huge change, you know. And my band, we've made a bunch of records, and we've never gone in a recording studio. We've just, you know, we sort of use the home recording method that has changed the whole landscape of, you know, where you'd go. I mean, I remember when my old band in the 90s, it was a huge deal for us when we made our first record. We drove to Chicago. We paid like $1,000 a day for 7 days. We had to finish it in 7 days. That's all we had. Like, it was such a different experience of making music. And I remember it's very challenging for someone my age who's been doing that to not slip into old man mode, where like when I was your age, we had to you know, we had to drive in a van, and we didn't have cell phones. And you know, I don't know if I'm answering your question. I sort of
No, you are, because like I think it sets the sort of the stage for like discussing all this digital stuff, because well, we'll talk about it in a second. So you work at Pandora. Explain for the people who are not, because you sort of touched on it, who are not in the US. Like it's an American, a US only stream. How is it different? And then what do you do there exactly? Are the two things I need to do.
So I mean, essentially Pandora is not that different than Spotify or iTunes or whatever. It is a streaming service. It is one of the original streaming services. It was originally, I think one of the cool things is the origin story is that Pandora originally was meant to be this kiosk in record stores where you would be like, it was basically like emulating a record store employee. So you could be like, I love this band, and this machine would be like, well, if you love this band, you'll love this band and this band. And it was sort of meant to be an in-store kiosk. And eventually that sort of transformed into online radio. One of the things that I think makes Pandora sort of stick out is the genome, which is our sort of automated, and well, it's not even automated, our analysis, where how we have a ton of human analysts who break down every song into like 400 different genes, everything from like raspy voice, smooth voice, nasal voice, lyrics, instrumentation, time signature, and build this like incredible, they basically build the musical version of the human genome, so that the recommendations are extremely accurate and interesting and creative. And I've found that to be sort of my favorite part of Pandora. And to be honest, when I first listened to Pandora years and years ago, just like all algorithmic recommendations, it was pretty primitive, like, oh, you picked a live song, here's another live song. Like, it was very,
Yeah.
and now it's like, it's amazing. Like, sometimes I just pick the weirdest thing and throw it on Pandora just to see what it'll recommend to me, and I discover tons of stuff like that. So anyway, Pandora is basically this cool streaming service that's very much focused on discovery. A big part of the listening is you can start a station on Pandora with any artist, like you, me, any artist in the chat. We start that station, and then it uses the algorithm, and it just keeps recommending stuff. And it is really, really an awesome way to discover new music. My main job at Pandora is we have a whole set of creator tools called AMP, which is the artist marketing platform. And so my main job and my team's job is to do outreach to creators, to artists, to labels, to managers, help them learn how to use our tools, how to do better on Pandora, reach new fans, to strengthen those relationships. Personally, I've turned that into something, as we were discussing, a little bit more holistic, where I think it's a little bit disingenuous for me to sit down with a bunch of artists and be like, let's talk about Pandora AMP. It's the only thing that matters, because I know it's not the only thing that matters. It's one piece of what should for you be a really broad ranging toolkit. So when I talk to artists, I really like to sort of leave the door open to talk about anything. And that can be, I love Bandcamp. I think all artists should have a Bandcamp. I think you should spend as much time working on Spotify as you do on Pandora. It totally makes sense. So and I love talking about the actual mechanics of being in a band, because that's a big part of where I come from. So newer bands aren't always familiar with like how to get a booking agent, how to go on tour, where to make merch, et cetera, et cetera. And so I really try to approach that holistically and basically just help artists be artists and try to help them succeed. And then in addition to that, I'm also a programmer. So I program metal and punk, experimental and new age music. So I sort of have two very different jobs, but they sort of are tied together in a way.
And AMP, you even if you're an international band from Europe, you can still sign up and use the AMP tools, right?
Yeah, and that's really critical. It's like Pandora is US only, which is, something we talk about. Everybody asks. I would love for it to be international, but I don't know what that means. But AMP is available to everyone anywhere. So if you are an artist, or if you have artists and you want to promote them in the US, you can absolutely sign up for AMP. You absolutely should. We do free webinars. You'll look at if you see my profile, I put my email there. You can email me anytime. Like, I want to help you do better on Pandora and help artists do better in the US. And so the AMP tools, yeah, they're available anywhere in the world. And to be honest, you can't technically listen to Pandora, but if you have a VPN, you could at least listen to see what it's like.
Somebody asked, what does AMP mean? Start at the start.
Yeah, AMP stands for Artist Marketing Platform. I was going to
guess.
I think that's going to change, because, as a lot of you probably know, marketing is a gross word, especially for artists, and especially like me coming from a punk background. Like, marketing is the worst part. So I think we might just switch it to be AMP. It is what it is, but it is a set of tools that allows you to do things on Pandora, like boost spins, and probably my favorite part of that tool set is that you can record messages in your own voice and post them on your station. So you can make intros to songs, you can make playlists where you talk about all the songs. It can be your music, it can be music you love. It can be anything. And so that voice component to me is really powerful in sort of personalizing the relationship between listener and artist.
And so I think we should, well, like what I want to do is I want to go through some of the stuff that that you get asked a lot, that you may be surprised to get asked a lot. But I actually want to talk about something else first. Okay. So we had Mike Warner on the show, and if anybody's got questions, you can feel free to start filling up the chat. I'll look them over in a second. So we had Mike Warner on a while ago, who wrote that book, Work Hard, Playlist Hard, and then you were telling me that did you write a chapter? Is this considered a chapter? Because
generously, it's a chapter. It is, I think, one page.
It's okay. So you wrote a very small short chapter, or
yep.
In my when I printed it out, less than half a page, my friend. But so if anybody knows about, oh yeah, so there you go. Jamie's posted in the chat. Mike wrote this really good book on playlisting and all that kind of stuff and learning to do stuff yourself. But Andy, I want you to tell me about the chapter you wrote, because I think it links this where you started in music, where you are now. And I really, it resonated when I read it. So tell me about this chapter you wrote and the flack you've gotten for it.
I mean, the flack was good natured, but I think when I wrote, Mike wanted me to contribute. I've known Mike for a long time. We've become really good friends. That book is awesome. It's such an incredible resource. Funnily enough, I don't know if we can swear, but when I was younger, there was a resource called, it was like I don't know if there's a magazine called Maximum Rock and Roll that's like a punk magazine, and they would release this. This is such a tangent, sorry, but they would release this book, and it was basically a compendium of everyone in the United States and in Europe who booked shows. And so it was this like resource to help bands. It was pre-internet, so to help bands book tours, and it was called Book Your Own Fucking Life. And it was like the greatest resource in the world. And I reviewed I reviewed Mike's book on Amazon, and I said, "Oh, this is like the modern version of Book Your Own Fucking Life," and then they took my review down because it had a swear in it. But sorry, tangent. But so Mike wanted me to contribute, and he originally he wanted me to contribute about Pandora, but he sort of knows Pandora. Then he wanted me to contribute about Bandcamp because he wasn't going to include Bandcamp, and I thought that was weird because I worked at Pandora. And then I was like, hey, let me just contribute what I think is, to me, the most important, what I try to teach people when I talk about music. And it became jokingly known as like my hippie approach to music. But basically it suggests that as an artist, you should take your music or your art, whether, you can be a painter, a sculptor, whatever. As an artist and a creator, you should reach out to all the creators that you love, all the creators who've made art that's meaningful to you, that have changed your life, whether it's a musician, whatever, and just send them your art, no strings attached. Like, don't ask them to sign your band, don't ask them to take you on tour. Just be like, hey, I appreciate what you did. Your music got me through these tough times. I just wanted to share some of what I do with you, period. And fight that urge to ask for something in return. And you will be amazed how often this will create these super meaningful connections. And the thing you didn't ask for will happen anyway. And even if it doesn't, I think the end I just wrote, even if it doesn't, anything that creates this really beautiful, healthy community and ecosystem of artists sharing art does nothing but make the musical ecosystem better and more meaningful and less gross as the music industry tends to be. But yeah, it's all about sort of, and I don't want to call it networking because there's no expectation. It's just really building these connections with the artists that you find meaningful. And like I said, you'll be surprised. The artists will reach out to you and be like, "Hey, you sent me that thing. I love it. We should play a show together. Oh, I love that thing. You should be on my label." Like the stuff that you wanted to ask for but didn't will often just sort of happen organically, which I think makes it even more meaningful. So I think that's the.
That's a good. I've been with one eye. I've been reading it to make sure that what you're saying is true. So, and that's a very good summary of your own work. It's definitely good. It's definitely good. But the reason I want to talk about it before we go into more detail is I think that when I do a lot of talks, it's one of the big things that I explain to people that you've sort of got to just, dare I say, reach out to people. And it's not every email you send or not every DM you send to people needs to be, I need this or I need that. And I think that sort of disappeared with in the digital world. There's not as much of a people just hang out to hang out. They don't, or well, that's sort of what we're doing here. We're just sort of hanging out. But I think so. Like when you explain that it's sort of this hippie vibe or whatever, I was also thinking that like what the chapter offers is something very important. That like if you get 2,000 submissions or whatever, or if you get 800 emails, there is something that needs to stand out. If every one of them is, "Hi, how do I become number one on whatever?" It's very impersonal, and it's like, and so a lot of the time, because when I did radio promotion, I would be writing to people, and you have to write to them like you know who they are and you're interested in who they are, because the connection is what drives things forward. And I like, do you think that's a little lost now
for sure.
compared to before? And if so, why do you think that?
No, and I've been on, I've run a label, I've worked at a record store, and like people, and I think I joke, I actually meant to, when I was like, oh yeah, there's nothing more amazing than like getting a package in the mail where someone sends you a record and just like, hey, I want to send you this because I love what you do. And you're like, people don't send packages anymore. And I was like, but that is kind of, it's everything has become so accessible and has become so like, there's like a presumed quid pro quo, I think, that like that is lost. Like I saw a question in there about how I started to tour, and like back then touring was scary and it was challenging, and nobody, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have the internet and we didn't know what to do. And so you would send, you would know bands and you would send letters and you would send tapes and you even sent faxes. And we were friends with this one band and they were kind of popular, and they were like, yeah, you can lie and use us as a reference. It was a whole different world. But I think there was this it was this I do think things have changed, but I don't want to say in a bad way, because I love the way it is now. Like I am so obsessed with music still, which I think is remarkable. I still have a voracious appetite for new music and for discovering new bands. And like, it's never been a better time for that. Like, it's never been so easy to like hear some crazy music that some kid in Japan makes in his bedroom. Like
it's much more exclusive. It's much more inclusive and accessible. And I think what you're probably going to get at is the fact that back then there were no other options than to write to. There was no Google. You went to someone you knew. It's not like you're like, oh, my friend's going to give me shitty advice. I'm going to go to Andee Connors on a webinar to find out what's going on because my friends don't know anything. But do you know that that's the case? Like, there was no other way to exchange information and to learn things.
You definitely relied more heavily on community. I mean, I don't want to slip into old man mode. Yeah. But like, I definitely like my my big band, like from the 90s, like I want to say we did 5 or 6 or 7 full US tours and at least 5 or 6 West Coast tours before we had a record out. Because that's what you did. Like you had control over that part. You know, you could play shows, you could book shows way easier than you could get signed to a record label. So you sort of built that momentum organically. Like, so by the like fifth, and we ended up being on a label, signing to a label in Chicago, and Chicago sort of became our home away from home. And that's because we had been to Chicago like 20 times and played there and had really great, like there was a point at which we would play to like 15 people in San Francisco, and we would drive to Chicago and play a sold out show in Chicago. And so given the choice of like a crappy show in San Francisco or driving 30 hours straight, we'd be like, hell, let's just drive to Chicago and play a show.
What I think is interesting, the person we had on last month, they were talking about how they make electronic music, and they're like, and they do A&R at the same time, and they were saying, well, actually, like the first music I put out was after 9 years. So I think like the same sort of like rules can apply. Like I think that's what's fascinating. The dynamics have changed a lot, but the mentality is the same. It's that you've got to build up something somehow.
I think in some cases that's the same, but you and I were talking earlier about there tends to be some unrealistic expectations based on like streaming numbers and based on, you know, like historically, I mean, it's very complicated to talk about, and obviously but you know, like when I grew up, getting on the radio was a huge deal if you ever did. But that's also, getting on the radio wasn't how you made money. Getting on the radio was purely promotional, and that helped you book tours and sell records and do all that stuff. And I think a lot of that has gotten cloudy over as we've shifted to digital. And it's gotten a lot harder to navigate and to sort of understand holistically, you know.
But do you think that the same rule, the same theory applies? It's just how you apply it's different. The mentality's surely the same. That you need to find a way to let people know you exist.
Well, in a way, I think it's positive. I think it basically what was once physical can now exist virtually. You know, like when I was coming up, you had no choice but to like drive around and play shows. That's the only way people could discover you. And now there's this virtual world where people can discover you on the internet, which I think is the greatest thing that's ever happened. You know, I love the fact that, like, especially if you know, and it's been this boon for people who play, you know, make records all on their own and play all the instruments. Like you no longer have to buy a van and schlep around for 2 months. You can actually just like work it virtually and work on your socials. And I do desperately appreciate that. And I think it's incredible. And again, for me personally, as a totally obsessive music nerd, I can't imagine being in a better place. I just think sometimes it's challenging for the artists to know how to navigate that. And I think that's a lot of what I set out to do with, you know, with my job at Pandora and just sort of more in general, is finding some middle ground where, like, I want artists, and me too, obviously, as well. Like we talked about this earlier too. You sort of determine what success means to you and how to get there, and then that sort of dictates your approach to music making and potentially touring and recording and promoting, you know.
Because that's another thing, like, that I think about. Like, as I said, like when I do talks, like I talk a lot about the artist journey, the idea that, you know, as an artist, you need to know what you want to do, or like, and I use, say, for example, like black metal as an example. You're not going to get played on the radio.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it doesn't matter how important radio is. Like today, yesterday, in 5 years, 30 years ago, if you're making that kind of music, you're not going to get played on the radio, not because it's good or bad, but because radio is about how you sound in between two other songs. And I think that's one of the other things that I think a lot of artists miss is they expect to meet someone who's going to tell them what to do, but the people they meet are going to ask them what they want to do. And
Yeah.
then it's like, well, what do you want to do? What are your goals? And then this is how we do it. And I'm assuming that's what you do in your job. You say to
Oh,
people, like, what are you looking to do? Right.
oh, for sure. And like it was a challenge for me because I've come at music from a very punk rock, like obviously anyone playing music wants, you want to play a show, you want it to be sold out, you want there to be people, you want people to buy your records. But like I know that the music I like and that I play is weird and has limited appeal. So like I entered into this whole world with a realistic expectation. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go on tour with Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? Like I was like, what I want, I knew what I want. I wanted to be able to go on tour, travel, meet people, make records, and not lose my shirt. That was like, I had a pretty realistic expectation. And now that I'm 53 and I spent,
and wearing two shirts, you're wearing two shirts. So it's gone well.
yeah, exactly. But like I spent 20 years like in a van sleeping on the floor, like eating at McDonald's at truck stops, like, and I love it and I loved every second of it. But now like I have a partner, I have a house, I live in the woods. I have different expectations and different needs, and I have a different idea of what success means to me. And for me right now, success means being able to make records, being able to go on tour maybe 2 weeks or 4 weeks out of the year, and again, not lose tons of money. But I recognize that I'm talking to young artists, like, we were talking about TikTok earlier with somebody else, where like, TikTok for a lot of artists is the new barometer of success. And so, that was really interesting to me when I went to South by Southwest and I was mentoring, and all across the board, young artists were like, we need to have 1 million followers on TikTok. Like nothing else matters. That is the barometer of success. And I'm like, okay, great. That's a little bit alien to me, but I understand it fundamentally. Let's talk about what we can do to help get you to where you want to be, like to help you realize what for you is success. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So let's talk about, so you talk to artist managers at like all different levels, different types of music. What are the things that you get really surprised people ask you? Because I think that's a good way to do it. Like, what are the things that you're like, oh, I thought people would know this? Because those are the gaps that I'm always looking to fill when I talk to people, where like, when you're doing it, because you do office hours, right?
Yep.
Yeah, like what do you what do you end up talking about the most? What are the things that you think, oh my god, like I can't believe people don't know this, that's obvious to you and maybe not obvious to other people?
I don't know that I really I don't know that I really approach it like that. I'm very much like, I mean, there's some questions that people ask about Pandora, which repeatedly we have frequently asked questions, which I understand. I don't think I'm surprised, but I think you and I were speaking earlier about, I think sometimes understanding what streaming means and how streaming works, and that like how streaming internet radio is different than FM radio, and how like I think there's some fundamental things that sometimes help to be discussed and explained. Um, but a big thing we talk about is, one thing that's very challenging for artists is, how do you get considered for a editorial playlist? Like in the case of Spotify, they have a whole cottage industry where there's people you can pay money to and you buy tokens. And I've done that a few times as an experiment, and I didn't have much success. And we we don't actually even have that on Pandora. And so in the short term, I made it my, not my mission, but I made myself available. So if if you're an artist and you make hip hop or you make Latin music and you want to be considered for a playlist or for a station on Pandora, you can send it to me and I will get it in front of the right programmer. Like that's, it's something that's, I think is missing from Pandora. And so in as much as I can, I want to make it easier for artists to do that until we do have some sort of infrastructure for that.
But do you find that still something that's like, why do you think people don't do it? Like, this goes back to the idea of reaching out to people. Do you think people just don't know that's what they're supposed to do? Do you see what I mean? Is it a source of it's not clear to people what they need to do, or it's an issue of people aren't accessible?
Honestly, I think being a musician, being an artist in 2023 is so much more challenging than it was. Like, I know I talk about, oh, the good old days, whatever, but like it's a lot of stuff to figure. Like, every DSP, every Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, Tidal, Pandora, they all have tools, they all function differently. It's a lot of stuff to learn. And then you have TikTok, Instagram, you have all the socials. Like, it is a lot of stuff to remember, a lot of stuff to learn, a lot of stuff on your plate. I was talking to someone else this morning about, there was an article called How TikTok Ruined Music, which I think is a very provocative title. But the upshot was that they talked to a lot of artists who found it challenging to be an artist because they were expected to be posting on socials 20, 30, 40 times a day. And so they found that, like, the actual act of creating music took a back seat to trying to keep up. So honestly, I just feel like it's not that people are not informed. It's not that people are dumb. It's just that people, it's like it was already a full-time job to survive as a musician. It's just exponentially gotten more complicated. It's that accessibility that I find totally appealing, and as a music fan, that makes it even more challenging to stand out as an artist. And so to stand out as an artist, you have to be a master of navigating DSPs. You have to be a master of socials. Like, it's really hard to stand out in a crowd that just gets bigger and bigger every day.
So I got a question here. So Remy says, I've been able to grow it's a DM to me directly. I've been able to grow my artist music substantially on Pandora via AMP. But for Canadian artists, it's next to impossible to pitch Pandora editorial music, even through distribution companies.
So that's kind of, I mean, I will be totally honest. Like, that is like a huge hole in Pandora, and it drives me totally crazy. Like, there's no official way as an artist to go to Pandora and submit your music for editorial consideration. That simply does not exist. It is infuriating to me. I have been fighting to build a system, a portal, something to allow artists to do that. And it's still something we're working on. But for whatever reason, it's been really challenging to make that happen. So, as I mentioned earlier, until that happens, I am 100% able to help you. My email is in my little description under my name.
Or yeah, throw it in the chat though. Throw it in the chat now, just so Remy can grab it.
I have, but yeah, it drives me crazy, and it's very frustrating. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So if you have, so my team programs all the sort of niche genres. And by editorial, I mean like placement on like today's hits or, one of the stations that are built by our programmers.
Human program, right? Yeah.
Human programming,
Yeah.
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 So, um, so my team handles all the smaller genres. So if you do metal, punk, experimental, new age, jazz, classical, show tunes, blues, singer-songwriter, if any of those are you write to me. It's really easy. My team handles all that. If you're a more mainstream like pop, Latin, dance, country, you can still send it to me, but I will forward it to the correct programmer. So at least it's, well, A, so it gets to them at all, but B, so it's also not a cold call. So it's coming from someone they trust, and I'll be like, hey, check this out. You might want to program it. It's not the best solution, but it's the only solution we have until we have an actual tool. Um, and again, like it drives me crazy because as an artist, I mean, I found it very frustrating to try to get. I felt weird having not used, having not explored Spotify. So I went and I spent $50 and did that whole thing where you buy tokens, and I submitted to like 10 or 15 different playlists, and I think I got on 2, and I got apologies from a couple, and it was a weird system. And also, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Fiverr, which is like you can go there and get people to play drums for you or do voiceovers for you. But there's a lot of people on Fiverr who misleadingly offer their services to get you on playlists on Pandora that doesn't exist. You could potentially get on one of their playlists, but that's not exactly the same thing. Um, so again, I apologize. That drives me crazy. It's frustrating, but you have my email. So until then, if you have music that you want considered for editorial placement, you can send it to me and I will get it in front of the right curator.
And I got another DM saying, I have a roster from the UK. Does Pandora have international playlists? I'm assuming they mean playlists that cater to international artists.
Yeah. So as a label, again, you can just email me and I can help you with this. But as a label, you can get label access to your artists on Pandora, which is sort of an easier way to access all the people on your roster. Um, we're not available internationally, but we have plenty of playlists that play music from artists all over the world. I don't think that's what you were asking, but like I actually went to 2 years ago, I went to Chile and I met with, they have a really robust arts organization, and they're really, really intent on getting Chilean artists to break in the US. And so we spent a long time like helping them get set up and helping them focus on the US. And that's sort of the same, I presume, with you. It's like you can get you may not be able to listen to it, and you may not be able to advertise to your fans in your home country, but if you're trying to break your artists in the US or reach fans in the US, then AMP is a really great tool. Pandora still has the largest monthly addressable audience. Pandora is owned by Sirius, which is a satellite radio service, and I think between Pandora and Sirius, the monthly listening is like 100 plus 150 million monthly listeners. So it's definitely worth focusing some of your energy on Pandora and on the US market via AMP. And I can help get you set up. You can just email me.
So, because I want to talk about that most recent question, but somebody also asked, would you prefer us to send the Pandora link to your email or the UPC IRSOC to the song? A Pandora link would probably be perfect, right? If someone's writing to you to talk about something.
Sure, I don't actually care. Like,
oh, right, okay.
Pandora link's easy, but if you can send me anything. You can send me a SoundCloud link, you can send me a Bandcamp link, you can send me a Spotify link. I don't care. I can find it on Pandora, but if you have the link to Pandora, it's good to know that it's already been delivered and it's live. But okay. You could just, to make things easy, you can, if you want my help with that, you can send me exactly what you would send someone else, like a link, a SoundCloud link, one sheet, like whatever you would send to someone else, you can send to me. I can make it work.
Okay. Not everyone is that flexible. So somebody asked here, do you submit the release day or days before the release? And I was looking through what we talked about when we chatted last week. Timelines, insane how hard they are. Do you want to walk through how you like to do things, or how you all at Pandora like to work? Because I think we can always spend time on a subject like this. I think it's super important.
I would say that the sort of sweet spot for programming is like a week to two weeks before the release date. Normally your stuff, if you have an aggregator, if you use like The Orchard or CD Baby or DistroKid or someone, your music tends to get delivered 2 to 4 weeks, I think, before release, sometimes longer. But for me personally, I mean, if you know the release date way ahead of time, it's great. But I think for me, because this is sort of a ad hoc situation and I'm going to be recommending it, best thing for me is maybe a week or two ahead of time. That way I can have it on my list. I can even send it immediately to the person, the programmer in question. They could even add it and then it would go live when the release date flipped over. But for me personally, when I'm like metal, for instance, I have a doc that's just massive that I keep track of. And every time I find out about a new single or a new, so I have like from today, probably all the way to December of all the release dates I know about, just because I also want to plan, like if I'm going to feature something or if I'm going to do something with a specific artist. But again, if we're talking just helping you reach the correct programmer to get your music considered for editorial placement, I think 1 to 2 weeks is the sweet spot.
Okay, we got more questions coming from the same person. Does it need to be PRO registered in the States for you to play it? No, right?
I don't even know what that means.
So Performing Rights Organization. So the answer, Jeff, is no.
I mean, I will tell you, it has to be. We no longer have that system. We no longer buy CDs. We no longer have that system that got me my job at Pandora. So everything has to be delivered by an aggregator. Has to come complete with like all the DDEX metadata. So it just has. So I presume most artists in this chat have a distributor, whether that's CD Baby or DistroKid or The Orchard or whoever. It just has to be delivered officially with all the metadata to Pandora for it to be playable. Yeah.
And someone asked about the metadata that, they should be talking to their aggregators about that, because they'll set them up with all that kind of stuff. Right?
Yeah. When you have a new release, there's a little form, and it's the only thing that I think is complicated is collaborations versus featured artists.
Okay, go through that a bit then, because that's a good way for discovery as well. So
yeah, that's treated very differently. So if you like, let's say Mark and I have a record together, Mark and Andee, and the metadata has Mark and Andee as the main artist, then on Pandora it will live in both. It'll live on Mark's artist page and my artist page. So that's the collaboration, that it exists in both places. In AMP, it will be its own profile. So if Mark and I wanted to like do a campaign to promote it, we would go into AMP and we would claim the Mark and Andee profile.
Record a jingle together, an intro.
Yes, exactly. Which we would do, of course. Yes. But on the service, it would exist in both places. But if it was Mark featuring, it'd be like Mark song title X featuring Andee, then I'm just a featured artist, and that doesn't really affect anything. It's just part of the song title. I know there's a lot of politics on whether you're a collaboration or a featured artist, but it's just important to know that if you're a featured artist, you don't necessarily have the same access, or it won't be on, like if if Mark did a single with me as the guest and it just said featured Andee, that won't be on my artist page. It'll just be on his artist page because I'm just the featured artist. Hopefully
And
that makes
is
sense.
that different than other platforms? Or do you think it works roughly the same from your knowledge? Just because this like the whole collab thing comes up a lot, so I'm curious about it.
Based on because my band just did a collaboration with this TikTok woman who's awesome, and she had this very calculated, she's a total genius, she had this really calculated plan, so she didn't want it to be a collaboration, she wanted to be a featured artist because she didn't want our single to like mess up her like her
Yeah.
her plan. So it's very obvious when you're setting up a new song or a new album in with your distributor, it'll say, is this a collaboration, is this a featured artist? It should be very explicit, and if it's not, you should have a rep that you can ask at your aggregator.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody's asked about your monthly webinar that you do. How do they sign up for that?
Oh, that I can put in the chat too.
Yeah, cool.
We do two monthly webinars. One is a very brain. One is wait, what?
Businessy, straightforward.
No. One is very
info rich.
One is very much about the tools, and it's very, we like walk you through the tools like step by step, where we're like, okay, here's how you feature a track. You push this button, you get this drop. Like it's very, very, when you leave the intro to AMP webinar, you should be able to go directly to your AMP account and start running campaigns. The second one is office hours, and that's a lot more like this. It's very conversational. It's just us answering questions, addressing any problems you might have. I just put both, and those are evergreen. So if you miss, it's the first and second Wednesday of every month, and if you miss it, it's the same link for the next one. It'll just flip over when the month changes.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, I there's something I want to discuss because we're running out of time. Okay, well, Simon has a question. Is post-release day too late for existing tracks to be considered for editorials playlists?
No, not at all. We can, I mean, I think it's ideal to have stuff up on the release date, but not at all. You know, I'm very much, I'm very anti, we had a panel at Music Biz that was about Catalogue, and it was a lot about release dates, and I'm very, I don't know how to say this. It disappoints me that the music industry is so release date driven, because to me, release dates, I mean, from a business perspective, it's obviously meaningful, but from a listener perspective, it's meaningless. Like if you hear a record that's 20 years old today for the first time, it's as meaningful and powerful and as important to you as the person who heard it when it actually came out. So it kind of drives me a little bit crazy that we're so focused on new releases, and we have such a dramatic divide between new releases and catalog. And we used to fight at Aquarius, my old record store. We used to fight about this all the time because we had a record of the week, and often I was like, our record of the week was 20 years old because I just heard it for the first time and wanted the world to hear about it. But my coworker was like, no, it has to be new. And I'm like, it is new for almost everyone because no one knows it exists. So yeah, that's the long version of no, it doesn't matter. So you could, if you have a song, I mean, you know, if the song's like 3 years old, then maybe because of the way things work, that doesn't make sense. But if it's, you know, a week, 2 weeks, a month, then yeah, hit me up and we can see what we can do.
I do want to discuss like this thing about radio, because we touched on it when we were talking last week or whatever. So Pandora is like a streaming platform, and it's owned by Sirius Yeah.
Sirius, yeah.
And they own a series of radio networks, right?
Well, Sirius is a satellite.
Okay. And all the cars. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sirius, and it's a different. That's kind of why Pandora. Like a lot of people ask, like how, they're like, okay, we're on Pandora. How do we get on Sirius? It's quite different because Sirius operates more like a regular radio station. It operates a little bit more like terrestrial radio. Like on Pandora, every artist in the world can and does have their own station. Like you can start a station with any artist in the world as long as their music has been delivered to Pandora. That is very unique. And I can start a station with any artist and get recommended to other artists that sound like that. That's not how Sirius works. Sirius is very much like commercial driven, like you kind of have to be successful to be on Sirius. It's very much like terrestrial radio. And so a lot of what I tell people, you know, I would love for Pandora, and it kind of is starting to become a feeder for Sirius. But because you have so much more control on Pandora, my suggestion is usually to try to kill it on Pandora and just know that like the programmers on Sirius are paying attention to what's happening on Pandora and vice versa. And I recommend stuff to my analog on Pandora or on Sirius. So you have all this control on Pandora. So use the tools, build campaigns, run campaigns, do everything you can, get some buzz going, and then organically you're likely to find your way onto Sirius.
And so the key was Sirius. You mentioned it, and you mentioned terrestrial radio. So and I think this is what a lot of people don't get about streaming. Is like, what were you saying? That so somebody listens on Pandora, that's one person listening, that's one play, right?
Yeah.
But then in normal radio, it's like a DJ or a producer deciding what to play, and that gets played to hundreds of thousands of people. Is that the power of radio? Like,
well,
can you explain the balance there, like, and why people ask that question about wanting to get played on Sirius?
Well, I think that's the important differentiation between terrestrial radio, satellite radio, and streaming. Is that, like you said, like if I play a song, I hear that song, I determine what I want to listen to, but it is actually one person hearing that song. Whereas if that song gets played on Sirius on a Saturday night on a really popular program, that one play was probably heard by 2 million people. So those two are it comes up a lot when we discuss royalties, and technically I can't really speak to royalties. I have my opinions like everyone else. I'm an artist. I would love for artists. I mean, my heart belongs to artists at the end of the day. So I would love for artists to make as much money as they can. I'm not sure. I think streaming, I don't really understand how we got to where we did with streaming royalties. Again, it's way out of my purview. But a lot of times, we'll have an artist who's like, hey, I spun, I have $100,000, 100,000 spins. Why am I not, buying a house or, whatever. And I'm like, and that's when that comes up where like, oh, there's a real difference in listening and in how many people are hearing it, and the difference between getting played on the radio versus getting played as a streaming single track. I think it's just helpful to remember. And someone mentioned this in the chat I saw, where like historically, and I don't want to say it because listening has changed a lot, so this is like an hours long conversation, but like historically FM radio was promotional. Like when you got played on the radio, you weren't like, oh, I got played on the radio and they send me all this money. You got played on the radio, which helped sell tickets to your show and book tours and sell copies of your record. It had more of a promotional component. And there is an element of that still with streaming, although I do recognize that a lot of, and maybe the majority of people now listen exclusively streaming. But that's a big part of why a lot of the tools that we work with and that we promote with AMP are designed to give your fans more opportunities to support you. Because I think, and I'm speaking for as a music fan, like if there's a band I love, to me it's not enough to listen to them on Spotify or on Pandora. Like I want to go to Bandcamp and I want to buy their record, or I want to go buy a t-shirt, or I want to go see them play when they're here. And so a lot of what we do is, how do you create more opportunities for your fans to support you? Because I think in general, fans love the people who are making the music that make their life better and meaningful, and want to support the artists they love. So it's all about figuring out ways to give them more opportunities to do that.
And would you think that is that why you're a big fan of, say, Bandcamp? Like that you think that it's good that you offer fans opportunities to buy your music where they want to buy it? Or like, is that because you sort of mentioned that at the start of the conversation? Is that sort of your mentality, that it's like you need to be in as many places as possible to let people support you?
Yeah, I think there's, with the way modern listening and modern music consumption has shaken out, I think there was just, it's been a little bit misleading that you're like, oh, I'm on Spotify and I'm on Pandora, that's enough. And it's not enough. I don't think it was ever enough. Like, to me, and again, that's kind of how I approach this. Like I would feel disingenuous being like, well, yeah, use the Pandora tools. Okay, good night. Like, because that's not enough.
Yeah.
Like you need to play shows. You need, if you can. So, some people don't like to play shows, that's fine. But even if you don't play shows, you should have physical stuff for sale. You should have t-shirts. You should have a merch page. You could make yourself a Patreon and then offer your patrons, something special once a month. Like, there's so many ways to let people support what you do and like show their appreciation for what you do. And Bandcamp is huge. Like, I think it's, if everyone thinks it's hilarious how much I love Bandcamp, but like, it's a great platform. Especially in an age where there's less record stores and there's less ways to, purchase physical items, this Bandcamp is a really great interface, and it works really well with streaming. Like, I love people on Pandora being like, hey, thank you so much for listening to my music on Pandora. By the way, we have a new LP. If you'd like to buy it, click now and buy the LP. And now you're getting the best of both worlds. You're having someone listening to your music on streaming, and they're buying your record. Like, I love that sort of how that works together so perfectly. And for me, the interface and Bandcamp is really simple. I don't want to go too on my little Bandcamp rant, but it's like.
But I want to. Sorry to interrupt. I want to ask somebody. Do you think? I talked to someone recently who built a platform for, I can't remember the name, for listening to audio files, like on a better version, a new version of iTunes. And he was saying he would like to see more platforms like that. It's unfortunate that Bandcamp is the only one, that he would like to even see more diversity in. Or do you think there's enough of these? Because I think that's a good way to sort of round off here. Do you think there are too many platforms, or do you think that it can go more niche, or there's more that people can offer? How do you see it moving forward?
That's a hard question. I don't know. From an artist perspective, I think there's so many that it's impossible to keep up with all of them. One of the things about Mike's book is some of the DSPs in Mike's book I'd never heard of. And they were like, and I'm like, I'm in the industry. I've been doing this for years. And I was like, oh, I've never even heard of that DSP. And he's like, oh yeah. And he would explain to me what they were. And to me, that's remarkable that there's so many DSPs. But I think, you are the master of your own destiny. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You can focus, and my band is a perfect example. Like we both my bands are very niche. Streaming is not an important part of either of my bands' existence. And so a lot of our focus is on Bandcamp, selling physical merchandise, touring when we can. And while I still do streaming, I'm not focused because it's artist and genre and case specific. So for some artists, like new age artists on Pandora is like the ultimate for new age artists. New age artists do so well on Pandora. So as a new age artist, I would be focused on Pandora. I would be putting tons of energy. You just have to sort of understand the landscape, understand what you want and what you need, and again, what success means to you. And I think I want to say I don't think there can be too many. I think there can be too many for a single person to keep track of and stay on top of. But the people who like, I don't use Tidal. It never even occurred to me to use Tidal. But I know people who use Tidal, and they love it. And good for them. It's kind of like a modern version of the format wars. Like everyone's like, CDs suck. I only listen to LPs. And having run a record store, it drove me crazy because I'm like, you know what? I don't care how you listen to music, just that you do listen to music and that you support the artists. So yeah, go crazy. Only listen to cassettes. If that makes you happy, great. Same with you, LP people. Same with you, CD people. And so I feel the same way with DSPs. Like, I would love for someone. I actually have been thinking about starting like a super punk rock ultra indie DSP. I thought that would be really fun because I don't think that really exists. But like for the time being, if you love Spotify and Spotify gives you everything you need, then by all means focus on Spotify and be happy with Spotify. But my sort of return to Bandcamp is always like, just remember that listening to an artist on streaming is maybe not enough support if you really, really love an artist. Like, reach out and buy their record, buy their t-shirt, send them money. Like, just, like, appreciate how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into that song that you listen to every day, and maybe react accordingly, and like, be good to the artists who have been so good to you.
Let's end it there. That was good. That final monologue was perfect. It's like we'll get that transcribed, and it'll be the part 2 to your hippie chapter. Okay, everybody, we better go because we've been on for a while here. You've thrown your details in the chat. I don't think there's anything else we need in there.
I just put the link to AMP in there. So.
Oh yeah. Did you DM it to someone? I don't know if I see it.
Oh shoot, yeah, I did it direct.
Yeah.
But I'll put that in there because AMP is where you go. If you have AMP, that's where you go to use it. If you don't have AMP, that's where you go to sign up. And then my email is just Andee@pandora.com. If you have any questions, if you're having trouble signing up for AMP, if you're confused about anything, if you want to talk about cats or horror movies, whatever, I'm always available. Just hit me up anytime.
We made it an hour and a half without any cat talk. You had warned me.
I know. Well, I kept expecting one of my cats to make an appearance, but they didn't.
All right. Well, there you go. Okay. Well, everybody, thanks so much. Thanks, Andy. It was brilliant to chat.
Yeah, super fun. Thank you.
I'm going to just close the chat window so I can wave goodbye to everyone. Thanks, everybody, for coming. And thanks for all the thank yous. It's so nice. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
see you later.
everybody.
See you later, Joe. Bye-bye, Captain Kickass. See you later, Miriam. I owe you an email. Don't worry. I haven't forgot. Bye-bye, Alex.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
See you later. See you later, Andy. Bye, Victoria.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Pepe in brackets. It was a pleasure, Andy. See you later.